everyone, what's up? This is the 81st episode of Everyday Journal. With me, Julian. Tonight I have my regular co-host, Callum, the Death of Peace, Smith. Hey, Callum, actually, you know what? Before we start, we're going to leave this in because I actually really wanted to make sure that I would pronounce your first name correctly. I got an app, and the app was going to be like, oh, here we go. No, type. Oh, no, I messed it all up. Maybe you introduce yourself then.
My name is Caleb. No, it's not really. It's Callum, which is a very commonly mispronounced name, which Julian was calling me Caleb for like a year or two, but it's okay. People do it often. So yeah, good evening, everyone. I hope you're all doing well.
Yeah, having a great day. Like, summer has come to Europe. I guess it also came to the UK despite Brexit and everything.
It tried to get in. We tried to get it away because we try and push all good things away from us. But yeah, it's been really hot until this weekend. It's been pouring this past weekend, and it's the most perfect description of England right now. I'm looking out my window and it's just grey, windy, and a little bit of rain. So yeah, it's lovely.
Just your stereotypical England. Did you know that London actually sees much less rain than many parts of Germany and vast parts of Europe in general?
Is that because of the smog and stuff?
You think you got like a dome of smog over the city? Well, no, it's probably just for I was going to say cultural, no, for natural reasons.
There probably is a reason. Oh, well, I do notice the difference when I go to the countryside in the air pretty strongly. Like, I'm so accustomed to London atmosphere and air that it just feels normal. But then when I go for a walk in the countryside or something, or go to a different country, I'm like, wow, it's so much nicer to breathe and be here. It's lovely. So
it sounds like when you go for a walk and you stroll into the countryside, accidentally you find yourself in another country. Like, oh damn, that was too. I went too far.
I'm in Germany by mistake. How did that happen?
Is that how you got all your colonies? Like 50 years ago? Oh, it's actually
totally. we went for a walk. We were taking our loved ones for a walk, and oopsie daisy, here we are. Yeah.
Like Eddie Izzard said, you colonized, you stole countries by the cunning use of flags. Yeah, you showed up to India, you're going to be like, hey, I'm going to claim this fraying land. And then the Indians, actually, how do you call people from India Indians? That sounds wrong. Okay, so
Indians, yeah.
So the Indians were like, no, wait, you can't do that. Like, there's a couple 100 million of us. And then the British were like, well, do you have a flag? They're like, oops.
Yeah.
That's how you do it. Awesome, man. What have you been up to lately?
So I've been playing loads and loads of M21 and drafting. In the last couple of years, I've gotten very into drafting, and I feel like it's improved overall gameplay and stuff. Like you learn about the combat step, which as a former Miracles lover, I wasn't great at the combat step. And so I am about 50 drafts deep into M21, which has been a blast. Still playing some Legacy while I can. But yeah, that's really taking up the majority of my spare time after work and stuff. Oh, actually, I've been getting into Warhammer 40,000 as well, which has been pretty fun. I'm sure.
Oh, 40k, okay.
Yeah, I'm sure we have some listeners that have been they're into it as well. I've picked up Death Guard, the plague-ridden Sons of Nurgle, which is pretty fun as well. So yeah, that's been taking up a lot of my time as well.
And are you playing in do you say in paper? No, on tabletop?
In paper,
or is it
on
online?
tabletop. Tabletop works. I haven't played at all yet. I mean, I used to play as a kid, so I kind of remember the rules a tiny bit, and then I've read them again. But no, I've just been collecting and painting, and a lot of friends from Magic got into it because it was a really good hobby during downtime when, Magic Online is fantastic, but when it got a bit too much. So I'm really, really excited to when we can start to meet up and actually play properly as well.
Awesome, man. I only ever played one game of Warhammer in my life, and I played Wood Elves, and I didn't even understand the rules. And I played...
Of course you played Wood Elves.
Yeah, but that was actually I always liked elves in games. But yeah, so my friends were like, okay, this is King of the Hill scenario. And after a random amount of turns, whoever is closest to this artifact or whatever wins the game. And I was just running around. Everybody ignored me because I was horrible at the game. And then for some reason, we had a random way to determine the turn where it mattered. And it was super unlikely that it would happen on the turn I was closest. And then I won. So I have a 100% win streak. If that makes sense. So
a win is a win.
Retired with honors.
Cool. What about you? What have you been up to?
Dude, I've been playing so much Valorant. You know, that's how Riot went ahead and they released Valorant, which is the FPS, the Counter-Strike killer, I guess. And they also released, what's the card game called? Legends of Runeterra or something?
Yeah, I've seen both of these games mentioned so much by people.
Yeah, I haven't played Runeterra yet, but they're also going to release a third game, which is going to be a fighting game. But Valorant, it's just like, oh my god, I've been enjoying it so much. I've been playing it with my best friend almost every day. We play like, I don't know, 3 to 5 matches every day.
Really?
And
okay.
it's, yeah, I come from a really big Counter-Strike background. Like my first online games used to be Quake, and then like for a very long time Counter-Strike, when I couldn't imagine that my life would be defined by anything other than Counter-Strike. But yeah. I mean, that's when I was 17, so
I would say I'll pick it up and join you one time, but I think I'd be absolutely terrible. So,
dude, we are really bad. I think I'm in gold 3 or something, but I've been losing a little bit today. A little bit, like I lost like 4 games today. So, and
okay, maybe I won't join you. I'll find someone better.
Oh, okay. Did you know? Like people in that game, when somebody's playing like worse than their rank would indicate, then their teammates get pissed. So they say, oh, you're boosted. And I thought like whatever boosted means, like maybe you play with like a better friend and then you get to a higher league. No, there's actually, and this is crazy. So here's my number, so call me maybe, no. There's boosting services where you submit your password and everything, and they boost you to a higher league. So if you want to get into if you're in the lowest league and you want to get into the highest league, that's $1,140. And then I don't know how long it takes. Like I would guess.
So
like
someone logs onto your account and then just plays until they get you to a level. Is it?
Yeah, and like the highest level is called Radiant, and you get destroyed. Like that's basically like taking somebody out of their first ever game of Magic and putting them into Pro Tour finals or something. Like even worse, because there's not even like that much variance.
I guess. I mean, that sounds like so much money that someone would ever pay to just level up in a game. But it probably does take the person playing that much time to be worth that much money. But I just can't imagine how someone would want to do that. That's crazy.
Yeah, can you imagine like for the person who's getting paid, like you're just literally getting paid to, well, as we would say, own the noobs, and then you do.
yeah.
That's amazing.
Or just play a game. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I've been doing. Well, not the boosting part, more the playing part.
Yeah.
And I've also played a lot of Fs again lately. Like I got I think a 5-0 the other day. I also played Natural Order Band, which I enjoyed quite a bit. Natural Order Band really introduced me to the powers of Uro. Like I've been mostly on the receiving end of Uro, but holy shit, that card gets you out of so many bad situations.
I'm at the position where, I mean, this is very easy to go into like a whole segue of talking about these cards and how they affect Legacy, but I've been of the opinion that Uro is miles ahead of Oko in power level for a while now.
Definitely.
It's just insane. So
there have been like so many positions where I felt like, well, this is, no matter what happens, I'm just going to be so ahead. Like, I feel people should actually more often daze Uro than they realize, even though it feels so bad. But
it feels so bad to daze the first Uro, but then you are trading a card for a card, and then the land he potentially puts in is just going to like make the daze dead anyway. So they probably should, even though it's a really bad exchange. Maybe it's an argument for daze being worse than usual in the format or something. I don't know. It feels so bad to daze that first half, though. But you're right. It probably is correct.
Yeah, the acceleration you get out of it, I mean, maybe it helped that I played a deck that would play Uro on the second turn quite often. I had 12 accelerators. And then if you play Uro on the second turn, then you untap with 5 mana on the third turn. That's just like beyond crazy to me.
It's so strong.
Yeah. So Uro,
it's interesting. This card and Oko like introduced, I think, the Legacy format to life gain when it's tacked onto a strong effect to actually be fantastic. Batterskull was the first one, but it was really like kind of half of the card was because you're gaining life. But now you just gain random bits of 3 life here and there with Uro and Oko. And it's the first time
I gotta stop you there. You can't disrespect my boy Rock Swarmonk like that. Batterskull.
Oh, fine, okay. Yeah, but that was when a 3/4 body was actually good, right?
It's not anymore.
You get 6/6s for.
It can block Wild Nakato.
It's true. But jokes aside, like myself included in the Legacy format is waking up to incidental life gain being pretty strong and effective against Delver especially, or aggressive strats. So it's interesting. It's an interesting development in Legacy. I never thought life gain would be seen as a good thing, but all it took was to be tacked onto a 6/6 doesn't die, draws cards thing.
I think one part of that is that when you have a lot of awesome tap out stuff that you want to do at sorcery speed, if the life gain gets you another turn of doing that, that's kind of crazy. Whereas like most of the stuff you do at instant speed is instant speed for a reason, right? Because the effect is usually slightly worse. Whereas if you can tap out for something on your main phase and know that you're going to see your next turn no matter what, pretty much. That's incredibly powerful, because then you know you're going to get to tap out a second time and just really reap the rewards of committing so much mana on your main phase. And that's something that's especially those Uro and Oko decks have been doing successfully.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. It is the ability to just keep slamming. Yeah, very good point.
So we want to talk about something. Yeah, other things. Like I said, I've been playing elves. I've actually learned how to repair my bike. YouTube is just, I don't know how the people did it in the Middle Ages, but like I just go on YouTube and I check out, hey, how do I change this? How do I change that? Today, actually, I removed my front tire and repaired a couple of things, and I hope it's gonna work. Like if I don't show up tomorrow,
if we don't hear from
Facebook,
you tomorrow, it's all over.
Then it didn't work. Yeah.
yeah. It is amazing. YouTube has everything. It's sort of talking of Warhammer just very quickly. It's like back in when I used to play it younger, as I was younger, you'd have to think of all the paint schemes on your own. You'd have to do trial and error. But now you can go onto YouTube and find a tutorial and get some ideas like that. It's pretty amazing. So
you're saying you're basically just net decking?
Yeah, I'm net decking completely.
You're net decking your color schemes.
Another thing I forgot to mention that I've been doing is I did play a couple of challenges this weekend, which was pretty fun. I've not been able to play a challenge in like well over a month, maybe even 2. It's been ages. Since the UK has started to ease up on COVID regulations, I've been either going to the parks, going out, trying to have a drink with someone outside. So I played Saturday, and I picked up a deck which I threw together on Friday at work because I was a bit bored. And we'll get to that in a second. On Saturday I went 1-2, very, very bad. I was like distracted, not playing well at all. It's a good example of, even if a deck has got potential, playing bad is just gonna lose you matches. Like deep analysis there. But on Sunday I managed to play.
That's what
play
people
the same.
tune in for.
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally. On Sunday I played the same deck and managed to get to the semi-finals of the challenge. So 6-1 the Swiss, losing to the Urza Echoes deck, which we've talked about a bit before, which is very powerful. But I picked up Shark Blade, is what we're calling it. So it's a progression of the...
Can we please call it Shark Control? I know we talked about this, or did we? But to me, it's Shark Control. Shark Blade.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know it's awful. I think they're all awful. But Legacy's a format full of awful deck names. We've got to face it. Okay, Shark Control. But there is Stoneforge Mystic and a Blade in the deck. So it's a continuation of like the Standstill Shark Typhoon deck we've been seeing and we talked about on the previous casts. This time I was taking a theory of the format's too fast that you want to be spending raw cards and raw mana on just raw card advantage. So I was playing with the idea that you play all these good cards still, but every kind of either threat or answer potentially, like they all get you an extra card. So the deck has Stoneforge Mystic, which is a threat, and it gets you a card advantage. So in the deck I had 2 Stoneforge Mystics, a Sword of Feast and Famine, and a Battle Skull. We'll get to the sword later because it's an interesting one. Other threats are Teferi Time Raveler, Jace the Mind Sculptor, and Shark Typhoon. Again, these are threats that they get card advantage. Like Teferi doesn't always get the card advantage, but he comes with other advantages as well. Shark Typhoon cycles, Jace brainstorms. Then the answers, like you have your generic cards like the cantrips and counter magic, but then Source of Plowshares. But then Snapcaster Mage is another answer which gains card advantage. So in the deck, which we'll link in the show notes if you want to follow along, there's no actual raw card draw. So there's no Standstill, there's no Predict. So the idea is you gain card advantage just by playing your cards to the board, presenting things, and you can pull ahead in that kind of way. So I think the theory is sound and it should be explored more, but I'm still not super convinced it's actually better than the Standstill because drawing 3 cards is pretty damn good.
Okay, so what was a common scenario where you were punished for the stand? Usually you don't end up being super punished for deploying the Standstill, but I would think it would be harder to navigate yourself into a spot where you can even land the Standstill on turn 2. I guess Spell Snare helps with that, right? Especially if you're on the draw.
Yeah, Spell Snare helps a lot, as you say, on the draw. Standstill is pretty awkward. Like, it comes to a point where there are Aether Vial decks in the format. There's Esper Vial and there's Goblins is now very, very strong. Delver is popular, and a turn 1 Delver does mean you can't play a turn 2 Standstill generally, unless you like have a Shark Typhoon in your hand immediately to trade off on turn 4.
Oh, that would be so sweet.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty nice that Shark Typhoon lets you do that. If you have a Shark Typhoon and the lands you need in your hand already, you can play a turn 2 Standstill into a Delver. You take some hits and then you cycle it for X equals 2 and trade off. They can't daze it, they can't force it, so they might bolt it, but then you do get the Standstill trigger. So it is possible, but there just does seem a lot of plays that make Standstill awkward. So another idea I want to experiment with eventually is to play like 2, maybe 3 Standstills as well, because it is a good card advantage engine, and the deck is able to play off. Like, I think Shark Typhoon is at the point where I think this card is just fantastic and it's really good in the Legacy format on its own. So the deck had a Hall of Healer's Generosity in, but I think you can cut that when you just have the Shark Typhoons. Like, Shark Typhoon is just a good card, and when you're already playing the Shark Typhoons, then you can rely on playing a couple of Standstills as a card advantage engine extra. And the rest of the deck kind of just builds itself around it. Because I think Spell Snare and Spell Pierce are pretty good in the format, because the format is faster and presenting more threats. And, well, we always have the Dreadcourt Arcanist problem, so Spell Snare helps there as well.
Oh yeah, that's a really good thing, because that's one card that causes the entire format incredible headaches, right? It's probably one of the very first things on your mind when you build a deck in Legacy right now.
Yeah. So the deck is operating off like the theory that I said, but I think there are just more ways to take it. Stoneforge Mystic in the challenge yesterday was pretty good for me. Like, I played against Delver once, I played against Burn, obviously, where it was great. It was just a good threat to play on turn 4 or 5. And what surprised me was the Battle Skull was fine, but the Sword of Feast and Famine was fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump ahead very quickly. So we had some some friends of the podcast questions. I'm going to jump to one very quickly now. So someone said, Young Toast on Twitter said, "What's the reasoning for Feast of Famine over Fire and Ice?" So Sword of Fire and Ice is fantastic at pushing damage. It's good in the blue-white Stoneblade decks that have True Name Nemesis as well, so it's a really good closer. You used to also be like, you want to attack through True Name Nemesis when the card was played more. The drawing cards are still very good, and probably objectively you'd say that the trigger from dealing damage is stronger than the Sword of Feast and Famine's trigger. But protection from green is really good in the format currently. So this was my number 1, level 1, thinking, let's try this sword out again. So in the challenge, I attacked through multiple green creatures, like Elks, Hooting Mandrills, Tarmogoyf, there's Icefang Coatls, Uro. I mean, Oko can still plus on the sword, but it protects your creature. Should it be like a big shark or something? So that was relevant. And the deck is reactive. So again, like, Shark Typhoon plays to this thing where you want to be reactive. So the deck has 2 Spell Snares, a Spell Pierce, a Counterspell, Snapcaster Mages, Force of Negations to Hardcast. So it's really happy to have mana up. So the trigger to untap your lands is huge. You can get in, play something pre-combat or mid-combat, Snapcaster Ponder or whatever, Teferi, Jace, whatever you want, play stuff, and then you untap your mana and you have all this counter magic up. So this deck especially is really using the effects of it properly. And it's also a fair deck that's just trading resources, so you're really happy for them to discard the card as well. Again, I played against Ant in the challenge as well, and the sword was just fantastic at grinding down the resources and letting me tap out to play a threat and then untap and have the counter magic up. So
yeah, I was going to say, because especially in the first game, you would think that most Blade decks can have issues with combo decks, for example, because eventually they just get like overwhelming forces and you sit there with all your white spells and they don't do anything. But absolutely, Sword of Feast and Famine is like an actual threat to them. Yeah.
I had a very bad hand in the game 1, and I just played the sword on turn 3. I had a force, and they just weren't able to kill me that turn, so that let me throw out a Snapcaster Maze the next turn, and then I started to take over from there. So it's quite interesting.
I want to see a scenario where you use your mana to hardcast Shark Typhoon in your main phase, then you untap using the Sword of Feast and Famine, and then you force something on that turn.
This is a scenario I completely dreamt up, and when I was putting it in, I was like, actually, it was a legit reason. I talked to a friend about it before, and I was like, look, you can probably cast the Shark Typhoon and then hit them. Hasn't come up yet, but it's pretty realistic. So that's cool.
So you also played this in the Sunday challenge, and I think you said you top 4'd, right?
Yes, yeah. So I do have the matchups, actually. I'll find them. So I came top 4. Let me just pull up the matchups.
And you didn't only play like against a couple of like cheap whatever decks, but you played against some legit decks, I would think.
Yeah, it was. So round 1 was against Snow, 1-2-0. Round 2 was against Yorion Bug, which was like basically Snow stuff, but had a Green Zenith package and loads of cards. Won that 2-1. I lost to Urza Echoes 0-2. That matchup, I think in theory, like, there's 4 blasts in the sideboard. It's like splashing red for them. But Chalice of the Void is brutal against the deck, and I didn't have many answers for it, so that's a deck building thing that needs
basically
to be
you have like 6 forces on the draw, and then if they do it like turn 2, you get Spell Snare and Pierce, but that's already it.
Yeah, and then Teferi bounces it, and Council Judgment exiles it, but it's not a great thing. Then
I could see something like Engineered Explosives in the sideboard, I guess.
Yeah, Engineered Explosives is reasonable. I should try a couple. But they are just an amazing force check deck as well. They go turn 1, Imri or Chalice, turn 2, Narset, turn 3, Urza or Khan. It's just, they're very good against this kind of deck. Next I played against Ant, which I won 2-0. Sword of Feast and Famine really shined there. Next round was Goblins. I won 2-1, which I hate to say this to my Goblin friends because I just absolutely adore the deck, but I'm splashing black for just Plague Engineer.
This is where we are at in Legacy right now. People splash Plague Engineer for primarily Goblins and only secondarily Elves, even though Elves has seen like a lot of results lately again.
I think both decks are legit very, very good. So I was looking at the deck thinking, how can I beat these decks with them? Like Engineered Explosives and Supreme Verdict, I've come to hate Wraths against these decks. They just grind through you like nothing. Yeah. It just doesn't matter. Like, so I have 2 Supreme Verdicts in the 75. I didn't even side the second in against Goblins. It's just not the way to...
It's rather pointless, right?
Yeah. Okay, I kill some 1/1s and a 2/2. You have 20 cards in hand, and you're about to play a Muxus. So yeah, pure respect for Goblins and Elves. I have Plague Engineers, so I beat Goblins 2-1 off the back of them. Then I play against Burn, beat 2-0, because Stoneforge Mystic and Battle Skull's great. Little anecdote, though, Teferi Time Raveler was absolutely incredible against Burn. It let me just counter their spells on their turn, and then develop as I wanted. I didn't really expect that, but it was completely crucial.
Okay, so basically you're saying you never have to fear something that goes like end of turn, burn, and then untap and kill you or something. So you know what your life total is gonna be. Yeah, that's some valuable information.
I didn't realize it until going into it. And then they had main deck Parasitic Pillars, so he was a way to bounce them, play some spells, carry on with the game. So yeah, super clutch there. Then the final round was against Rug Delver, which I won 2-0. I think the matchup is probably favoured. It's the kind of deck which looks like it kind of beats Delver. It's just all removal and some good threats and sharks they can't counter. But it was against a very good player.
Sharks they can't counter. I love that.
Exactly.
I still haven't fully adapted to Shark being a relevant creature type in Legacy now.
Oh, we'll get used to it, I'm sure. Yeah. So yeah, beat Rug Delver 2-0. So that was a clean 6-1 in the Swiss. Pretty good. In the quarterfinals, I played against very old school straight blue-white miracles with Portent, Predict, Back to Basics main deck and stuff. Wow. It was cool, but my deck is just felt like I had four blasts in the sideboard, and in game 1 I drew 3 Shark Typhoons and like just made 2/2s and 3/3s that they couldn't deal with that plus the card advantage. So that was a pretty easy matchup, I think, for me. But it was pretty cool to see that deck doing well. It's a fun one. And then finally,
who was actually playing that?
That was Punishing Waterfalls. So very good Legacy player.
Regular name,
He plays lots of Cephalid Breakfast. So I was expecting that, actually. But then turn 1 Portent. Yeah, it was pretty surprising. And then finally, I played against the absolute end boss, JTL Jeff Lynn, on Esper Vial. And he thoroughly, absolutely crushed me 2-0. Like, wasn't even close both games. So,
I would think Esper Vial is a deck that's basically built to destroy any kind of control deck. It's so incredibly good against control.
Absolutely. Just like game 1, I had a little bit of a chance because he messaged me after to talk about the match, and he made 1 or 2 tiny mistakes, he thinks, which in the end let me have a small shot towards the end. But really, he was just in control the whole time. And then game 2, I got completely crushed. He ended up, as I said, winning, and he went 10-0, 7-0 the Swiss, 3-0 into the topic.
Oh man. That explains why there's so many new messages. Like we have a group where we talk about the deck, but I haven't been too active in Esper Vial lately. But I love the deck. I really love the deck. I think I'm actually going to pick it up again.
There was a second Esper Vial in the top 4 as well. Coke MTG. He was playing it. And he said he was on a 31-4 run with it, including the challenge, which is pretty nuts. Yeah. He got like 2 5-overs in a row and then like a 4-1 or something. So, yeah.
So the deck is actually like printing money.
It is.
So could we actually save the world economy under COVID? Like if everybody just played Esper Vial, we would make all so much money that we could just recover the economy and everything's going to be fine. That's how it works, right? If everybody's winning, nobody's losing.
But what if we put Shark Typhoon in Esper Vial? No, we're not going there. We're not going there. You can't blink it. It's okay. So yeah, that was my challenge run. So we've got some really interesting questions from people all over the internet, from Twitter, from Discord and stuff. Is there anything else you think I should cover before going to them?
Is this the list you would work with going forward? Because that's always like the question you get the most when you tease a deck, when you advertise a deck. You already mentioned you're not sure about the standstills, but people want definite information. They want to know, what are they going to register for the next event? What is Callum recommending?
Yeah, I think the shell is solid. I wouldn't recommend this exact 75. There's some problems with it. First of all, I think it should play a third Astrolabe. The mana is tough.
Oh wow, okay.
The main deck is pure blue-white, but after sideboarding, there's 4 blasts and there's black for Plague Engineer. I still there's double white spells, there's double blue spells. You want to snapcaster things at the right time. The mana does push it, so I would add a third Astrolabe. Probably over the Supreme Verdict. I'm really low on that card. I just hate it in the format, honestly. I'd also cut the Hall of Helion's Generosity. I think it's very good when you have Standstill in the deck as well, because it gives you the flexibility of either rebuying a threat with Shark Typhoon or rebuying Standstill to just pull you further ahead if you need it. With just Shark Typhoons, it was a bit underwhelming, so I think I would cut that. Probably for a Krakus. Like, Uro is still in the format, and it's pretty good. Otherwise, the Leyline of the Voids in the sideboard are they stick out like a sore thumb. So I was recommended by a friend that they are amazing from decks that don't usually play Leyline, because Black Red Reanimator is very popular in Legacy leagues, and you have a very good shot of winning game 1, and you completely cheese them game 2. Like, they won't have an answer for it, and then you have a very good shot game 3 because you have the 1-up on them and you have the Leyline still. So in practice, in the challenges, people just don't play Reanimator very much. They don't play graveyard decks very much. There's a Hogak lingering out here or two, but I would just play like a Rest in Peace or 2, or a Surgical maybe or 2, rather than the ley lines. I think in the leagues you want ley lines. In bigger events you want something else. That's another change. Otherwise, I really need to just play it more, honestly. I liked a lot of the other numbers. 2 Stoneforge felt good. I'm considering moving the Battlescar to the sideboard. It's fine.
Yes. You see me going like the Emperor and Star Wars, where I'm like, yes, remove the Battlescar, remove the Supreme Verdict. Like, the other cards I think that are maybe not good enough for Legacy right now in general. And I've always been down on them.
It seems weird to just have 2 Stoneforge Mystic and 1 Sword of Feast and Famine, but yeah, the sword is very good when you throw it onto a Shark token, like, because they're flying, so they get through most things. And then you get to untap. Like
Sharks too.
Yeah, exactly. Sharks, how do they hold a sword? I'm going to let the listener decide how that happens. But yeah. So that's my thing. I think, so the deck is not perfect at all, by far, but the shell is strong, so definitely work on it.
So we actually have an interesting listener question about this that I've also been wondering about, and that is the one that I actually have to find, because somebody was asking, here it is, Jordan Woosley. How does he feel, well, that's being you, how does Callum feel about this deck versus more traditional forms of blue-white Miracle Control? Future of the archetype or a powerful option? Like, what makes this better than Miracles? Why would you want to play this over Miracles? So
I'd like to lump this in with the Standstill variant as well, because this Stoneforge package over Standstills it's still an experiment. Could be better, could be worse. My gut feeling says Standstill is a bit better, or in the numbers like 2, like I said. I think this is better than traditional Miracles. Like, Terminus is just not great in the format.
Shots fired.
Yeah, well, I mean, I love the old Miracles disc, but the thing is, Miracles is operating off the fact that Terminus is good, and it's just not great, honestly. I think, like we said it about Supreme Verdict, I think Wraths are just not very good. Delver is able to present this Dreadhorde Arcanist threat that you just have to answer, and they can not present more threats, so you have to Wrath it if that's your option. Like, also Elves, Goblins, any other go wide decks essentially are still insane at grinding out Wraths. Like, Terminus is obviously good against these decks, but it's just not powerful enough, in my opinion, in the format to be worth building around. Well, you want to be taking this like slightly more proactive approach, and Plague Engineer does a very good Wrath impression already. So
yeah, Plague Engineer gives me like so many more headaches than any Wrath ever could. Like, Elves especially right now. A lot of people that are doing that thing where we have a lot of discard because that works so well versus Snow. Because what we've been doing over the last couple of weeks is we've been trying to beat Snow by forcing Progenitors into play, and having a lot of discard helps with that. And this is also the kind of deck where I would feel like bringing in a tons of discard would be amazing. Whereas with Plague Engineer, at least you get to tap out and put that into play so I can't discard it anymore. And then I'm being put into this really weird spot where I kind of want to bring in Abrupt Decay against you, but it just feels like whenever your second best option is to Abrupt Decay Snapcaster Mage, it just feels so bad. Yeah, I guess there's other targets, but none of them really feel great.
No, completely. So, I would play a third Plague Engineer, actually. I realized that I got to put my hands up and say this deck is really not put together perfectly, so I wasn't going to play the challenge until 5 minutes before it. And I was like, actually, I've got the day. I feel like it. Threw it together, and I had an old list I uploaded to Mana Traders. So I wanted 3 Plague Engineers. I rented 2 by mistake, and I had 30 seconds to find the last card on the sideboard. And I have very few cards on my account because I rent everything. But I have some cards that I always like the nice arts of, like Brainstorm, Ponder, and Snowlands. And I have Lightning Bolts as well, so I just threw a Lightning Bolt on the sideboard. So that should be a third Plague Engineer. Should be one.
Oh, that one. Okay.
Yeah.
I was wondering, and then the Supreme Verdict, maybe an Engineered Explosives to have more outs to chitter or something? I don't know.
Yeah. Engineered Explosives or maybe a Disenchant. I think the deck struggles with Chalice, so...
Oh, okay, yeah.
I would like one of those.
You also get to Snapcaster that. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, exactly.
That's actually one of the late Philipp Schöniger. Well, actually, you say late if he's still alive. Well, late in his Magic career. Philip explained to me that his philosophy when building Miracles back then, when Miracles was dominating everything, was like, you really want to have impactful cards that you can Snapcaster back. So if you can, if you have a rare tear on the sideboard or something and you can Snapcaster back, that's just so much more valuable than having Engineered Explosives, for example, because you get double use out of it. And
it's
that's
so true.
something,
something to always keep in mind with Snapcaster Mage decks. This is where the Leyline of the Voids really stick out even further. Like, it's a 3 Snapcaster Mage deck. You really would assume you have Surgicals, but... so they're an experiment.
That's actually something, when I played Natural Order Bond and the other in a couple of leagues lately, and I did really well with it, people really didn't expect the Leyline game too. And I played against a guy, he really just started playing Necromurba on turn 2, Golgari Thug, and then he had the trump card, the Stinkweed, because that basically is better than anything. But I ended up drawing so many Swords to Plowshares and Paths to Access, and I literally won the game by just attacking with Dryad Arbor.
Wow. Yeah, I think people should experiment with playing ley lines more as well. Even in decks you can't cast it, because the graveyard decks are so strong, and they don't expect it from decks that can't cast it. So you'll get a lot of free wins like that, which is nice.
Awesome. A couple more questions. Go ahead.
Just to finish off the thing. So I think, this is better than Miracles as we kind of think of it as Terminus control. But I wouldn't be sure if it's better than Yorion Snow or just normal Snow. It's not to be said. I don't think that deck is particularly great, but it's this Shark Typhoon control decks, like Shark Control, as you said. It's got a bit more proving to do, but I think it's been putting up some results, and I'm excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, I mean, you've been putting out a lot of results with it. I saw Anorak play it a while ago, and I think Noah Walker wrote an article about it on Channel Fireball.
Yeah. I am seeing people on Discords and Twitter and stuff saying that they are winning a lot with it as well.
Is there a Shark Control Discord?
No, but there's Miracles and there's a Stoneblade Discord, so I've been seeing people in both talking about them.
Dude, you've only been adding those Stormforge Mystics so you can enter the Stoneblade Discord and be part of that. Well, you basically just wanted to appeal to them to have more company.
Yes, exactly.
Gotcha.
I think I'm in almost every single Discord just because it's
literally every single Discord.
Well, whenever I see a new one, I just join it, and then it's like being on a big forum. I go to them. So
how many Discords are you actually in? I'm in 15 maybe maximum.
I think 20 or so.
Oh, okay. I think there might be a little more than 20.
I'm sure there's lots I'm not in as well. But I like to, whenever I see a deck doing well and I'm interested in it, I can go to the Discord and see if people are talking about it. And
then you mute it and never return like I do.
Oh, everything's muted. Yeah, apart from everything everywhere is muted.
Awesome. Cool. So I wanted to shoot you another question that we received from Rebelcheap on Twitter. Rebelcheap actually the one who put curses on the map, actually submitted a couple of donation deck lists on my channel.
Yeah.
So if you want to check that out, check it out. And it's Julian.com. We have a couple of curse leaks.
They also top 8'd the challenge on Saturday.
Yeah.
Which is, shout out for that. Very good.
I hope they're gonna fix that one enchantment that actually doesn't work. There's one that's bugged that's supposed to make your opponent sacrifice a creature or planeswalker, and if they can't, they lose 5 life. Actually, if they don't do it, nothing happens.
Yeah, it's such a shame. We should also link the bug report in the show notes, because they've been trying to get Magic Online to fix that for ages, and so any upvotes there will help.
Oh yeah, definitely. So cool. What he was asking is, what's your game plan that allows you to consistently beat Oko decks game 1? How do you do it? Man, tell us.
It is a good question.
Is that Sharks their way?
Sharks is part of the puzzle. So the sideboard is playing Red Elemental Blast and Pyroblast mostly for Oko. Like, the card is obviously incredibly strong against blue-white. But the only really scary Okos are the ones that come down early. Like, the ones when Delver goes turn 2 Arcanist, turn 3 Oko, and they have dazes and potentially forces and stuff. Those are the really scary ones that snowball. The ones that come down on turn 6 plus, whatever, you can, once you have your mana going, the blue-white engines going, as I like to call it, you have your Swords to Plowshares. Like, the loyalty is high, but you can eventually ignore it, or you just gain control of the game by so much that you can attack it over 4 turns or something. And essentially it's just making a 3/3 every other turn, which is a lot less scary when you think of it like that. Like, the name Oko is like, oh my god, it's terrifying. It is an insanely strong card, but like I said, when it comes down early, you're under pressure from other things. Later, you can swords these every other turn 3/3s, and you have these sharks attacking it. And like in this build specifically, I had Batterskull or something with a Sword of Feast and Famine to attack through the Elks, which was very important. Like, I did kill a Oko by being able to attack through Elks and a Hooting Mandrills in the challenge. So you do just overwhelm it eventually if you have control over the game. And from Snow, it's scary. They have Astrolabes to make 3/3, so it's kind of like can be 3/3 every turn. But against that matchup, playing the Shark Typhoons as a enchantment is very legit, because they have very little ways to answer apart from Force at Will.
Oh, dude, yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, so you do just get to, like, they're a really slow deck as well. You get to this late game, and then you force something. You have a 5/5 Shark. That's going to kill an Oko. So I think it looks a lot worse on paper than it is in game 1. And then, yeah, it really does come down to a 3/3 every other turn mostly, and you just Swords and Snapcaster Swords them, and Teferi bounce the food when they're tapped out and stuff like that, and you overpower it eventually. So yeah, it's not as bad as people think, I think.
But you gotta, like, put it differently. Teferi is not bouncing the food. Teferi is literally eating their food because it disappears.
Yeah. Teferi's hungry and he wants your tempo back. Yeah. So I mean, that comes up a lot. Like when someone slams Oko turn 3, make a food, you slam Teferi, bounce their food token. You've drawn a card off the exchange. They then next turn make another food. You get to untap with Teferi and like probably swords their thing next turn and start to pull ahead, and you now have complete control of the stack. So as long as you have the tools, which like the blue-white decks with swords and Snapcaster Mage do, I think Teferi in a way trumps the Oko Teferi versus Oko thing.
Yeah, I've gotten to appreciate the card a lot more. Like, I've always been a little bit down on it because of like how it felt weak for 3 mana and stuff. But after playing with it in Natural Order Band especially, and also previously in Band Food Chain, it just feels so good when you bond something and you draw a card. I can't help it.
Yeah, I've been absolutely so happy with the 2 copies I've been playing in all these kind of shark decks. You don't want more. You can get like clogged on them, and you really want to draw 1 early game and then 1 later. So 2 feels like the perfect number. But it's been fantastic. It's so good against Delver. It just buys tempo, gets your card back, and then having control over the stack lets you do whatever you want. And it's especially good if you have like a Sword of Feast and Famine in the deck, so your creature doesn't die when you equip it and stuff. I really strongly advocate for 2 copies of Teferi in these kind of decks.
So one more question we received from Marcus Ewald, the grandfather of Blue. Why do you hate drawing cards, Callum? Getting at why did you can't remove the Standstill? Is that something we already talked about, or is there something else you wanted to say?
This is actually something that we really talked about. So I put in the show notes that this is something to say. But it goes back to the point about every card generating card advantage without spending mana on just drawing raw cards. Much to Marcus's, he's very upset with me. There's no cumulative knowledge. There's no Standstill. There's no predict. This is not a blue deck to Marcus.
I'm still waiting for the day where Marcus replaces all of his islands with like, all of the cycle lands that you can get. There's actually like 2 kinds, the ones that cycle for blue and the ones that cycle for 2 colorless and stuff.
Yeah.
Honestly, you should follow through with that. Marcus, come on, please.
But those aren't islands. They don't tap for 2 or more mana with high tide. So.
Okay. I'm still holding out for Urborg for blue for islands. That's just what I want. Choke and Urborg for islands.
Oh, he would. Yeah, choke.
I mean, that's called standstill, right? That's called stasis, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. So yeah, really excited for the deck. We're going to link it in the show notes. Definitely check it out. It's more than a meme. It started out as a meme. It was actually commissioned as a meme. And then the meme became sentient. And yeah, now it's crushing.
It's alive. For just a small further point to Shark Typhoon, I really think this card it can go in so many more decks. It's not just a standstill deck, or it's not just blue-white. So I have another deck idea I want to build soon, which is like land standstill. I know that's a very old deck and stuff, but using exploration and Hall of Helios Generosity and Uro to then make Shark Typhoon a very legit hardcast thing, and it ramps as well. You get loads of mana to cycle and make a 20/20 shark. Why do you need Merit Lage when you have a shark token? So that's my next project. You there, Julian?
I muted myself.
Yes. I was like, what's going on? Okay.
Here we go. I just gave you this huge, awesome introduction for our next segment on the show, which is deck building, philosophy, and principles, which is something you actually did a lot of work on in preparation. And now you have to put up with what I just came up with. So without further ado, tell us something about the principles, philosophies, and guidelines of deck building, not only in Legacy, but in general.
Yeah, so deck building is a really deep subject we could spend many podcasts on, and maybe this is a way to go into future things, but there's a lot of misconceptions in it, and it's pretty daunting as well. So I thought it was a really good idea if we just go through a lot of the fundamentals on how to start building a deck, what you should be looking out for, common pitfalls and stuff like that. So yeah, building a deck fundamentals. First of all, I like to say, why are you building a deck? The main 2 reasons you're going to build a deck are to win or for fun. It really does boil down to these 2 pillars very often, and you should be honest with yourself here. If you're building a deck because you think it's cool and whatever, that's completely fine, and these decks very often end up being good. A lot of decks that I've built are just because I think it's cool. That is a majority of my decks. So don't feel bad about admitting that you're building a deck for fun, because you can still work just as hard and it becomes good. Or you're building a deck to win, and that's your only aim. It doesn't happen as much in Legacy because it's not like a Pro Tour supported format or whatever, but people are still trying their best to win on online tournaments and stuff. So there's separate categories for these to win or for fun things. So to win, you're usually going to have, the format's been around for so long that you're going to, most archetypes or strong interactions with cards and combos and stuff have been discovered. There are some that take a while to be discovered, Dark Depths was a fringe deck for a very long time, and what's another one?
Black-Red Reanimator as well.
Exactly what I was about to get to.
The cards were around for years before people put it together.
Absolutely, and so it was just commonly accepted that Blue-Black Reanimator with Forcible and Daze was the best thing, but actually just being faster and different interaction with Chancellor, yeah, it was around for a long time. So there are probably still decks out there that aren't quite discovered, but generally, when you're building a deck to win, it's going to come from new cards. So some pretty obvious recent examples of this are Underworld Breach and Lurrus of the Dream Den. These cards came along and people built with them very quickly. And these decks just completely dominated and they got banned very quickly. So I'm sure everyone listening remembers these brief meta games with them. But that's what I mean when a new card comes out, you should be looking for interactions between it. Breach was obviously Lion's Eye Diamond and Brain Freeze. Lurrus is cheap creatures and spells, and Mishra's Bauble was the tipping point for it. So the other one is a Meta Predator. So this generally comes about in metagames where you have one strongly defined best deck. So again, using the same examples of Breach and Lurrus, because they're very recent. When Grace's Delver was very popular, I built a bigger Delver deck, essentially. So I cut the Delvers and played Young Pyromancer and Of One Mind. It was in the deck and stuff, but it was basically a bigger Lurrus deck that had more removal to beat up on the Delver variants, and it did. It beat Delver very consistently. So that's a perfect example of seeing that Legacy is a state where there is such a clear best deck. It's very easy to target it. You often are going to be a bigger deck of what that best deck is. So in the example of Breach, we saw Breach start off by playing Enlightened Tutor, and it was just a very fast, more all-in combo. But as it became very clearly the best thing to be doing, we saw the decks start to slow down and play Predict, so that they had more game in the mirrors. So we saw Predict and like more silences, and then Mentor Sideboard as like quote unquote the meta predator, because Breach was just so good that you had to play it really if you wanted to win. That's again just going bigger. So I think there's not many other examples of building a deck to win in this category, but those two are going to sum up most of it.
Yeah, that's actually interesting, because you mentioned that people then went on and went bigger as a meta predator, and I think that's a very common thing that happens in Legacy, because the first deck you build is going to be incredibly efficient, super optimized to use its mana very well early on. And as people then see that doing well, they're sometimes like trying to cut some aggressive elements, adding more mid-range or card draw or even control elements, and so the decks become a bit more sluggish, slower. But it's really just about going like over the top of your opponent, but not too far over the top. So I always just like to imagine the decks as, let's say, the fastest deck in the format is what I would call a 1, and then there's like a 2, a 3, a 4. The 4 is like the super slow control deck, and you always say like the 1... the 2 is favored against the 1, the 3 is favored against the 2, and the 4 is favored against the 3, because it's like over the top, but not too much over the top. Whereas the 1 and the 2 are definitely favored against the 4, if that makes sense. And that's also like part of what makes mid-range so attractive, because with mid-range decks, I would say you play the highest number of games where nobody's like super advantaged. Whereas like, for example, playing the 1 against the 4, you're very advantaged. Just like, yeah, that's basically a principle at work there. And I think one of the hardest and most rewarding things is realizing that you're supposed to go under those decks again. Like when everybody's playing like a 3 and a 4 deck, going back to the number 1 deck, which I guess happened at some point when people were playing like blue-red Delver, like those blitz Delver kind of decks before Dread Arcanist was a thing, where people were really like, no, I'm really just going to kill you on the 4th turn, and I might not have a ton of cards in hand anymore, but it won't matter. And that's something I really appreciate when somebody notices that and builds their deck accordingly.
Yeah, this 1, 2, 3, 4. That's a really good way of putting it. I never thought of it like that. I've always thought of it as like a tightrope when you're building this top deck meta predator thing. So you want to be, you're balancing yourself between one side is you want to be bigger and you want to consistently beat the best deck, which is like established. But you also don't want to like tip over too much the other side where you become too slow and mid-rangey and you're not taking advantage of why the deck is good in the first place. So Lurrus is good because it was lower to the ground and like. That was it basically. So you don't want to go too far into like just removal, because then you're going to lose why Lurrus is good in the beginning. Same with the Breach. So actually I forgot to mention a third way to be thinking about building a deck to win is mid-range and control decks evolve over time. And like the most recent example is we've had Oko, Uro, and Icefang Coatl and Astrolabe among other friends or enemies, depending how you look at it. There's a lot of love and hate for these cards. But when new cards that are obviously good in these kind of archetypes come out, you want to reassess how you build mid-range and control. And so mid-range and control before these cards came out was pretty much like Miracles and straight blue-white based, but Tropical Island has got such a huge boost recently that these like mid-range and control decks have been turned on their head, and now we have something very different. We have mid-range decks mostly. So...
yeah, but we don't have the good kind of mid-range. We don't have Death and Texas. We don't have Maverick. Everybody's playing like 4-color Maverick with Mox Diamonds. But yeah, that's just me going on a tangent here.
Yeah.
But
well, we'll have
that's
Oko
what I
and
miss.
Texas soon.
Oko and Texas. How has that never been tried? I guess because it's two off colors and it doesn't really work with Thalia. But Oko and Texas, that's the next step. We'll just say it's a deck we're building for fun, so we don't have to put up with any kind of restriction. And
We'll
then
get
maybe
XJ
fun is
Cloud
going to
to
turn
build
into something powerful. XJ Cloud, exactly. Yeah.
He loves Oko. So moving on to the for fun section, because Oko is so fun. As we said, you should be building decks for fun and Legacy. That is a huge part of the format for people, especially myself. This is why I build most decks. So again, you're looking for new or undiscovered interactions. Some examples of things that I've made or seen that I loved is Arclight Phoenix. That came out and I was like, wow, this is so cool with Buried Alive and Dark Ritual. So I spent months and months building an Arclight Phoenix deck. Echo of Eons is a great combo with Lion's Eye Diamond. That's been incorporated in Tez and other Storm decks in the Urza Echoes deck. Now, as we were talking about before, Standstill and Shark Typhoon, again, new interactions. Like Standstill always relied on the creature lands. Now you have a way to just not have to play them. And also, very often these decks do lead to be very good in Tier 1. So Dark Depths was not respected as a deck at all until I believe it won an Eternal Weekend in America 4 years ago.
Yeah, I think it was 2016 or 17. I think it was actually the finals in Europe was Black Red Reanimator versus some kind of Dark Depth. I'm pretty sure, because back then I said Dark Depth is gonna be here to stay, and Black Red Reanimator, that's just like a fluke. That's gonna go away.
Yeah.
I mean, at least I was 50% right.
The deck back then it was like sideboard sneak attacks and playing 4 Chrome Mox, 4 Simian Spirit Guides. It was very different then.
Oh, and Stronghold Gambit, right?
Yes, yeah, exactly. So I mean, Dark Depths is my favorite example of a fringe deck that became Tier 1, and it did used to be just as like, oh wow, it's a Timmy thing you're making in 2020, isn't that cute? But I mean, it's obviously a super real deck now. So it does make you wonder like how many more decks there are out there, because I mean, a really good example is Ninjas. This is a deck people, like, you say the name, you're like, wow, that's a cool deck, it's so fun and whatever. Oh, you played a turn 1 Ornithopter, isn't that cute? But so it won the Saturday challenge this weekend. It put another in the top 8, and there was another copy in yesterday's challenge. The deck is good. It's really good. It's a tempo deck with a lot of card advantage. So I could see this as another example of a quote unquote fun deck, which actually ends up being pretty good.
Yeah, the deck is much better than it looks, right? I mean, it sometimes has these weird draws where it is bad. But I've lost to it from points where I was like, yeah, I'm not losing to this shit. But I mean, turns out the shit was better than what I brought to the table.
Yeah. So yeah.
Something I find interesting as well is to look at things that are going on in the metagame with regards to strategy and especially card types. For example, I always felt like when Top Miracles was the top dog, right? I never really liked relying on stuff like Choke, or sometimes people even brought like City of Solitude or whatever, because that makes them unable to activate top, which is like, yeah, okay. But the thing is, Miracles didn't have that hard of a time removing enchantments. And the nature of enchantments usually is, except for Shark Typhoon, is once they are dealt with, their effect wears off and there's no lasting effect. So I never really liked it that way. So I always felt like if I want to beat Miracles, like top Miracles, it's gotta come from some kind of land interaction, because Miracles, for the longest of times, couldn't really interact with lands until they started playing not only Blood Moon, but the what's the one that destroys all the non-basic lands? Yeah, exactly. And they didn't really do that for a very long time. And that's something that Dark Depth, I remember, like, really, really exploited, because Miracles only had like 4 slots of Plowshares to interact, and that didn't always like be enough. And setting up the terminus was kind of hard and everything. And yeah, that's something that I really like to see. If you think a deck can't really handle a certain kind of permanent, then you either find a dedicated deck that really abuses that permanent, which is usually kind of hard, because I mean that leads to stuff like Enchantress, which I guess also like has its place and does well at times. And the other one is where you mindfully construct your sideboard in a way that you abuse this kind of permanent. For example, against the Oko decks, they actually kind of struggled for a while, depending on which kinds of colors they splash. They struggle with enchantments, for example, because Oko can't touch that, and then they have Abrupt Decay, but Abrupt Decay can't hit like more expensive enchantments. I guess that takes us back to what you said about Shark Typhoon earlier on, actually. So that's kind of cool. So always like having that kind of stuff on mind, like what are the top dogs in the format? Which kind of trouble do they have? What do they not want to face as a good card? And that might lead you to playing a card that in a vacuum might not be the best, most powerful card, but compared to what the decks you want to beat bring to the table, this is what you want to be doing. And that's why, looking back, it's just like I find it so genius that somebody put together Dark Depth and took the metagame.
There's a lot of like kind of fundamental things you can go back to, like. There's quite a lot of times where Grixis is the best deck in some, like the colors in some form. It's generally Delver, or it's like Lurrus and stuff. And enchantments are insane against Grixis. So like you were saying, and Oko, if it's in the Bant colors, enchantments are very good against it. So maybe this is a way to exploit the current metagame. I guess Rug Delver is the de facto like deck, but it's still like the Oko decks really rely on Oko to deal with the annoying non-creature permanents and stuff. So. Yeah,
Yeah, sometimes it's stuff like play hexproof creatures, play uncounterable creatures. Something we do in Elves right now. I think Newton started doing that totally independently of me, and I also did that. Like it's kind of cool when you see two people come to the same conclusion. For example, against what I mentioned earlier, the snow decks, that we want discard, and then we want to discard Natural Order into Progenitors, because the snow decks, they can't really do anything about Natural Order. Like, I guess you could have 10 snow permanents, but that's not really happening for your Dread of Winter. No. And it's not very common that people actually play Band Miracles, so they would have Terminus. So I really, really like that kind of approach. And that's also like goes back to, they have a certain kind of Wrath, and that Wrath can't interact with Progenitors, and that's where we are.
Yeah, it is picking apart the best decks. You think, if you're ground zero, you're building a deck, you have an idea, you think of a cool interaction or a cool way to build a control deck or a mid-range deck, you think, how am I gonna like face these top decks? So you usually have a Delver deck, you can have a control deck of some sort, like Snow kind of thing for now, and you think, how are these games going to play out? Like, what's the general way I'm going to lose? What's the general way I'm going to win? So exactly as you've said with Elves, you think, you found the hole in their plan. Like, they can't beat your Progenitors once it's resolved. So your now plan is going to be completely to have that resolve. But if you hadn't pinpointed that, like, you're just not bringing in discards. So it's a whole game plan rather than just a card here or there. This is where we'll get to sideboarding shortly. But sideboarding really encompasses how you build your whole deck based on how the metagame and how you think you play against these decks. Not just, a few cards for this, a few cards for that. You really need to have full plans exactly as you have.
Yeah, definitely. Do you want to go into sideboarding, or do you want to say a little bit more on general deck building considerations? I see some more stuff in the show notes right now.
Let's go on to the questions to ask yourself while building. I think these are good.
Oh, yeah, that's good. Yeah. So there's a couple of questions you will ask yourself while building a deck, or that you should ask yourself while building a deck, especially if you want to build the deck to win, right? I think if you're building the deck for fun, those questions are more secondary, and they come in as you refine the deck.
Them, but you can ask these questions yourself after you've built the deck to tune it, I guess.
That's what I mean by secondary.
Yeah, exactly. So the first one is, there's just the Delver test in Legacy. Like, can you put up a fight versus Delver? This is the deck that's going to keep you honest and fair if possible. Like, it's going to, like, everyone knows Delver by now. So if you have a deck that's like it's an A and B combo deck that uses a 3-mana card and then a 4-mana card, especially if they're blue, that is just not going to beat Delver. Like, Tricks, I know this is a really old combo that no one plays anymore, but just as a really, really simple example, it's a 4-mana enchantment and then a 3-mana thing after that. Like, that kind of thing is just rarely going to work against Delver. You can try and help with some, like, fast mana, soul lands and stuff, but reality is you're going to struggle. You need to have, like, lock pieces as well to use off this fast mana. So you just need to say, like, how am I building a turn 1 Delver with Wasteland and Daze? The second one is the most boring question in my opinion. It is, are you playing a worse version of something else? So a really good example is lots of Entomb decks. Like, you get them and you think, God, Entomb is sweet, I can go and get a Bloodghast, I can go and get a Creeping Chill to Lightning Helix my opponent, I can go and get a Cabal Therapy. But then you start thinking, okay, if I'm getting anything into my graveyard, I can get a creature. So then I can, like, reanimate or unearth this creature. And then you get to the question, like, why are you not just entombing and reanimating Griselbrand? So that's another question. Like, so it doesn't have to be as straightforward as that. But if you're building, I don't know, another example I think is Rip Helm. People have a big love for this combo. It's a cool combo. But I see people play it in blue-white decks a lot. And, like, are you playing these cards because you like to, or is it really better than a blue-white deck with just normal threats and stuff?
Yeah, I guess that's actually one of the hardest things for people to internalize, because, like you mentioned, for example, Rip Helm, it looks good, it's, like, cute, it has, like, some splash damage, and you can quickly get caught up in, this is cool, this is what I want to be doing. And I wonder whether that's something you might have asked yourself as well when you were building the Shark deck, but you already mentioned that you were primarily building it for fun, so the question was secondary. So we gotta dodge that.
Well, no, it makes sense though, because this is a really hard question to answer sometimes, because you may straight up believe that what you're doing is better than something else, and whether it is or isn't, then it's just going to come down to you have to play it. So I mean, there are probably metagames where Rip Helm is good, but I think it's pretty rare, just as use this as an example. So I think if you're pretty confident in something or not sure, especially if you're not sure, you should then just start playing it when you can. Like anyone that has Magic Online, just start jumping into the queues, playing it. If you start winning, you're onto something. If you start losing a lot, you should question that further. Like the Shark Typhoon thing, it started as a bit of a meme, as we said. It seemed like kind of cool, but
it was actually a commissioned meme from Niklas Holtmann, right?
Exactly. Yeah. He shouted at me to build a deck with the card, and then there we go.
Yeah. Something that I always ask people when they come to me, they're like, "Hey, Julian, there's this and this deck. I want to play this and this card in that deck. Wouldn't that be good?" And the question of wouldn't that be good is just like so deep, and people sometimes don't realize that immediately. Because yes, it's good against decks, I don't know, A, B, and C, but is that worth giving up percentages up against deck like, I don't know, D, E, F or something, X, Y, Z? And people usually often approach something like, oh, this is gonna improve my matchup here. And then the question is, but is that worth it? And I think that also on a meta level works for decks. Like you play your deck, and is it really worth? Like obviously your deck, your different version of an established deck is gonna be better against a certain number of decks, but you're also losing percentages against other decks. And that's really the big question you gotta ask yourself and answer for yourself if you're building the deck to win. Is that worth it? And I feel a lot of times it's not worth it. It's more like people get caught up in, oh, this is great. This is gonna be, I don't know, good against a couple of decks, but it's not. It's really bad against Delver, and I don't know about my Snow matchup. And at this point, I'm like, okay, it's just I'm not sure if this is where you want to be going forward, even though you beat your friends, I don't know, Treefolk deck or something, or you're good against the new Murfolk deck yourself deck with Orc. But yeah, it's one of the hardest things to ask yourself.
It really is. I mean, there's no lying here. Building a deck is very hard. Legacy decks are no exception, of course, maybe even harder than other things because you have to put up with so much powerful stuff from the other side of the table. So yeah, you may like lose horribly against Reanimator enough that you're like, I have to beat this deck, I have to put these things in. But you do need to be conscious of if you're putting so many things to beat one or two different matchups or one spread of decks, like if you make yourself so much worse versus everything else, are you really playing the right deck? Is this the way you should be approaching the format? Like you said, it's so deep. We could do a whole podcast on this one topic, really.
But you know, then people are like, oh, but you don't understand. Everybody else is doing it wrong. They are playing the decks that are good against me. And I mean, what am I supposed to do? Yeah, not play that deck then. But yeah, doing it wrong. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
If doing it wrong is winning, then you're probably doing it wrong.
Exactly. It's hard. Yeah. So that's a very hard question to ask yourself. But you should try and be as absolutely honest with yourself as possible, because yeah, you can like tell people that you're winning, but at the end of the day, you know how your game is going because you're playing them, and you should be happy with how you're winning or losing.
I mean, it can't hurt to really just like show around the list, and people might not have the same kind of experience you had because we already played it a little bit, but even just getting some external input on where people, like if you ask people for advice on a deck, they will usually tell you all the bad things. They will not tell you, oh, this is good, this looks like it's gonna work, because that's something you already noticed. Like when somebody sends me a deck, I usually initially look for flaws that I can see, because that's the most helpful thing. So don't be like discouraged. Yeah, right. So don't be discouraged if your friends just give you some bad points about the deck.
It's a natural thing. They're looking to improve it. They're not looking to like pat you on the back. They're looking to say, look, okay, well, I think this can be better in this way, and etc. So it's a good thing when people point out flaws in your deck, I think.
It's like, oh yeah, I like how you want to cast your Nicol Bolas Planeswalker. I think this is going to be very good against Burn. It's like, what?
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Cool. So yeah, as we said, very tough question there to ask yourself, but you should be honest about it. The next one, I think, is, well, it's another hard question. Is your deck's power level in line with the format? This means anyone that plays enough Legacy should be aware that you can down turn 1. The aggro decks probably kill you average of turn 4, and they have disruptions. So we're talking like Delver, maybe turn 5, Eldrazi aggro. You have these like mixes, like Elves can kill you turn 2 technically, or they can grind you out. Like you should be aware of the power level of the format is pretty high. So when you're building a deck, you can't have a deck that has a combo that like Goldfishes on turn 4 with no disruption. That's not going to work, as cool as it is. So you need to be thinking about how, again, it actually ties into other questions, but how are you going to win against the other decks in the format?
Yeah, I would say there's a specific framework of cards in Legacy that I really look at it like a cube almost, with different decks defining how far you can go in certain directions. Like Delva is going to tell you, okay, if you want to cast something for 4 mana, it better win the game. And there's like certain combo decks that tell you, okay, you definitely gotta have this amount of disruption or a very quick kill. So that's like a spectrum. You either have like a lot of disruption or you have a very quick kill that's rather hard to disrupt, and you gotta find your spot there. And that's basically the thing that's happening. If you want to go really late game, there's going to be, I hate to mention it, there's going to be stuff like Nick Fit, I guess. That's going to tell you, okay, your late game's got to be better than mine unless you have a combo going. That's actually like something that people in deck building usually like to do. Instead of trying to booster, whatever, improve their late game, they sometimes try to include some kind of combo. So we actually don't have to go to late game. Actually, a good example of that would be the World Gotcha Dragon. We just had Kyle on the last episode where he talked about he's playing Snow with the World Gotcha Dragon deck. And the kind of cool thing about that kind of deck building is you get those situations where you just close out the game rather quickly once you've established control. But you also get the situations where you win on turn 2. And that's something overall that always appeals to me. That's just like my thing.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that is the power of the format. Like, you're dealing with decks that can kill you on the second turn with Thoughtseize and Force of Will, and they can beat you on turn 10 plus with their mid-range threats. Like, that's what you're dealing with. So, yeah, you have to be ready for the format. You can't just go around with like really, really slow decks and expect to win. It's just not how it works. Next one is consistency. Consistency is the name of the game in Legacy for a lot of decks, especially blue, because they have Brainstorm, Ponder, cantrips. Like, there's so much velocity in this format. Like, the decks are just tuned to do what they do almost every single game. Like, you're not going to play against Dark Depths and they're just not going to find their combo. That's not how it works. You're not going to play against Storm and they're not going to find their Tendrils of Agony. Against the blue decks, they're not going to find their Force of Will if they want it. So you need to be able to, if you want to build a combo deck especially, like, you can build combo decks that kill on turn 1, but how often do they kill turn 1? Like, you might have Cheerios, and it's like, wow, it kills turn 1 like 10% of the time. It's just not going to cut it, as cool as it is. I mean, I love that deck as well. But yeah, you need to be realistic with how consistent your deck is. If you're building a fair deck, which generally is like not blue, you need to think, okay, I'm building a black-red mid-range deck. I have removal, I have discard, I have some threats. I don't think the core is just going to do well in Legacy, because you're going to draw the removal against control, you're going to draw the discard against an Uro deck or something as well, you're going to draw the lightning bolts against combo. It's just, you can draw too many threats. You need to have some engines in place. So be aware of this pitfall.
Engines are a really good point, because you mentioned about how you're going to have like discard or like removal spells. Like, why don't we really see a deck in Legacy that's really just like Chunt? You know, we have discard, we have removal spells, we have big creatures. Because that deck at its core is really just doing 1-for-1s, 1-for-1s, 1-for-1s. And the thing about Legacy is there are so many decks that are really going to punish you if your game plan is just going to be like 1-for-1s, 1-for-1s, 1-for-1s all the time. Like Elves is the prime example. It's going to punish you so hard if you keep doing that. Like I keep saying, when people keep a hand of like, I don't know, 4 lightning bolts and they think, oh, that's amazing versus Elves, they're like, no, this is just like so bad.
No way.
If you want to do that if you want to do that 1-for-1 thing, you have to have some kind of engine. Anything that you are building towards, like you're creating this short bubble where you can actually establish some kind of engine. Whether, I guess in the past it used to be something like survival of the fittest, I guess, but which was like much easier to establish. But or usually these days it's a planeswalker or goblin welder, something that makes it so that your 1-for-1s that you did to get some breathing room, I want to say, that they can become active. And if they are active long enough, then you're going to be just too far ahead for them to catch up. And you got to be aware of that. If you I can only stress that again, if you put so many 1-for-1s in your deck, you got to have something like that. And that's usually why strategies like Chunt kind of fail, because I guess they got him, but that's really just it.
I mean, if like just on the black-red mid-range deck example, you could have like Faithless Looting and Bedlam Reveler as an engine, because you're powering through instances of sorceries. You're using Faithless Looting for velocity and selection, and then you have a further way to recoup the card disadvantage. Like, this is not a great engine, but it's just an example of how to try and fix something that has the mid-range problem. Yeah, so that's a pretty quick, concise one. Lastly, I think it's really important when you're building a deck, this kind of ties into slightly more when you're playing to win as well, is how easy is it to hate out your deck and how much splash damage does it get from the current tier 1 decks. So yeah, it's a bit of both. If you're building a deck, you think, I really want to build, like, okay, let's take Arclight Phoenix as an example. If I was building that deck at the absolute height of Black Red Reanimator, I was going to have a horrible time. Going to run into like loads of ley lines, surgical extractions everywhere. You should be looking at what the best deck is, or the best decks, and think, does my deck I'm building have huge amounts of splash damage? Am I going to have a horrible time with people just like trying to beat other decks, and happens to me? Currently in Legacy, we have like Delver and mid-range decks doing pretty well and some combos. So there's nothing that actually sticks out to being specifically good against a new deck. So it's okay right now, but at the height of Breach, people are playing Graveyard Hate. You don't want to play a Graveyard deck then. So it's just something to keep an eye out when you're having some new ideas.
Yeah, what are actually the most consistent themes that come up at times? You mentioned the graveyard, that sometimes when graveyard decks are too strong, you gotta reassess whether that's where you want to be. I guess if stuff, for example, like blue-white top miracles or any kind of like miracles is super popular, then a more creature-focused approach, like straight-up green-white maverick, is kind of problematic.
Yeah, I think the main ones are going to be graveyard decks and creature decks that don't have like strong draw engines like elves. So if Delver is the best deck, you probably want to stay away from like just loads of threats that die to lightning bolts or swords to plowshares. If graveyard will be covered. Yeah, a good example I guess is Maverick, although that's not too bad. But yeah, those would be the main ones, I think.
So with all of this established, what's the best deck in the format?
Best deck in the format? I don't know. Like, people are saying Rug Delver. I just don't feel like it is. It's putting up all the results. It's obviously very good. I'm struggling to say one. Like,
it might secretly be elves. Like, given how there's not too many people around who are playing elves, but it's consistently putting like 3 to 4 copies in the top 32 of most challenges. And I would wager that like 5 times as many people are playing Delver easily.
Yeah, there's so many Delver players because it is a deck that, like, we're having Legacy as predominantly an online format now, and Delver is like always accepted as quote unquote the best deck. And Magic Online had a lot of grinders trying to win, and I think the numbers of people playing this deck are just like heightened strongly by that, and all the results we're getting are with that. So yeah, Delver's results are pushed up a little bit from that, but if you had gun to my head, I'd be saying Rug Delver and Espervile and Elves.
Oh, Espervile. Oh, yeah.
For best decks.
The thing about Elves is it's always like, I don't want to say easy to hate out, but Plague Engineer surely is a beating. And one of the things, like, while I've been enjoying Elves lately, is because Plague Engineer is somewhat at a low. Like, I face it every now and then, but it's not like it's always going to come down on turn 2. But yeah. Something interesting, by the way, that I wonder if, like, these builds of Delver that we're seeing right now, all these like super heavy mid-range decks, I always wonder whether A&T is just gonna come in and destroy them, because like in the first game, like none of their cards almost matter.
Yeah, you would assume so. It's hard to sum up exactly, but Ant is just kind of, the power level has fallen down a bit, maybe. No,
relative to the format.
That sounds wrong in my head now I think about it. I'm not sure. Like, I think it's probably very good against Delver, but there's a lot of other harder matchups, I suppose. Like,
the thing is,
still everywhere.
Something that Delver didn't have before is Stratoid Arcanist. And that's gonna put you into a position where you get so much filtering going on at that point. And even sometimes just like killing you out of nowhere. Like, that card can 7 you like in a single turn very easily. And it's not a card you actually want to bring in like a Prep Decay for. That's so awkward, especially because of the mana. So I guess somebody who's more familiar with the deck, we'd be happy to hear about that in the comments, like wherever you want, on Twitter @EternalMTG, or in our Discord if you're one of our Patreons. What's the deal about A&T right now? Where
I am hands in the air, a very, very bad Storm player, so I'm definitely not the best person to ask. But I'll be very interested in hearing some of the better, or actually any of the Storm players, what they think, like why the deck is good or why the deck is bad.
Open your hearts. Tell us about your struggles.
Yes. How many skulls can you make? Cool. So we have a last section of deck building philosophy, which is sideboarding. This is one of the most, like, I'm sure I did it so badly when I was younger and learning things, and I probably still do very badly. And it's very easy to gloss over and be lazy about. But there are some fundamentals about sideboarding that I think is so important that you just can't afford to get too wrong. Why don't you tell us about them, Julian?
So to me, the most important thing about sideboarding is, like, sideboarding is the one thing I'm the most passionate about when it comes to building a sideboard, because I feel I'm doing it very differently from not a lot of people, but a lot of people who ask me about stuff somehow. Like, somehow the people who ask me the most questions about sideboarding are the ones who have a very different approach to it than me. And to me, like, the most important thing is, do you want to have your sideboard so you can play Magic? Or, like, okay, that sounds so arrogant, but basically what I want to say is, do you want to build your sideboard so you get to play Magic in game 2 and 3? Or do you want to build your sideboard so you get to win the tournament? And that's, I mean, it sounds so arrogant, and that's not how I mean it.
I
but
get it.
yeah, the thing is, sometimes I feel like people are like, oh, and now I have 2 copies of this, so I can play better against this kind of combo deck, and now I have like 3 copies of this, so I can play better against like this kind of fringe combo deck. And yeah, I also have like this one card which will help me with the control matchup or something. And for a lot of decks, that's not really what you can do, because the thing is, unless you're playing, I don't know, a very, very even deck, then, like, for example, I guess most Delver decks are rather balanced. They get away with a lot of stuff. But especially if you're playing non-blue decks, my philosophy for a long, long time has been that I pick the top 4, maybe 5 decks in the format, and those I target really, really hard. Like, I want to make it so that once we go to sideboarding, I look at 4 or 6 copies of something, and I'm like, yes, this is, like, if this is my opening hand, if I've ever drawn this in the first couple of turns, maybe it's not going to win me the game, but it's going to be really good. And I usually make fun of the sideboards where people had like a 4th Snapcaster and stuff, and that's actually a kind of different philosophy. And that's also like part of me being fed up with Top Miracles at some point, where I was like, oh, this is decadence. Yeah. Like, you guys had a challenge where you just played a 15th sideboard card just for fun to like anything like Dwarven Pony or something. So maybe that's some PTSD
we did the
from there.
Challenge. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's something most decks can't do. So most decks really, I really truly feel, if you want to win the tournament, you gotta pick your spots, and then you just gotta be comfortable getting lucky, because those are the decks you're most likely to play against. And then if you run into some stupid kind of deck that you don't really have tech for, so be it. I mean, that's really just how it goes. I remember MKM Card Market Barcelona 2017. I played Elves. And before the tournament, they actually did an interview with me. And I was like, I'm feeling really, really good about this list. The only thing that I cannot beat is Sneak Show. So very first round, I lose to Sneak Show. It's like, okay, that happens. Then I win 7 in a row.
There.
Yeah, pretty much, right. Then I win 7 in a row. I make top 8.
Nice.
And in the quarterfinals, I lose to Sneak Show again. I mean, that's just what happens. The thing is, this is one of those matchups that's not worth trying to beat in the first place. There's, like, you can play Confusion in the ranks if you want to, or even just something else, but Confusion's ranks is one of the best you can do.
Yeah.
But it's not fucking worth it. It's better to just have more discard, because that's more applicable against other kind of combo decks, like Storm was more popular, and also playing against control decks. And this is where I want to be. You try to have some kind of spread, like you want your stuff to cover as much as possible, but there's a certain minimum level of power in my sideboard cards that I don't want to go under, just because it spreads it even further. It's like, basically, you have like your bread and you're spreading your butter on it, and then a jelly comes on. There's a certain density of jelly you want. And if you go below that, then it's not even like a proper bread anymore, even though you are, you know what I mean, right?
Yeah, I completely understand. This is a great way of putting it. Yeah. So the bottom line you're saying is, yeah, you can't be too fancy with your sideboard. Like, if you have too many 1s and 2s you're not going to reliably draw them as well in enough of the games. You can try and have them overlap and stuff, but the main thing is you can't beat everything, and it's not worth trying to beat everything for a huge amount of decks. And so for you, for Elves, I know I don't even know what your current deck is, but I'm going to guess it has 4 Ley Lines and 4 Abrupt Decays and like 3 or 4 Thought Seizers.
Yeah, you're really good, really good. I have 4 Abrupt Decays because just like Dreadhorde Arcanist is such a big pain in the ass.
Yeah.
And actually, we don't have Ley Lines right now. I have 6 discards, 5 or 6 discard spells, depending on how many I want, 3 surgicals. And then I recently added 2 Carpet of Flowers again, because Carpet of Flowers is just so insanely good against Delver. And then Progenitus and Collector.
So you're just like really hard targeting Delver now. So you have Carpets and Decays. Like, there's a lot of cards to bring in. For a matchup that is probably not bad already. So, like, this is clearly you just saying, I am not willing to lose to Delver. with my
and
current
yet
deck.
I might still, right? So we talked about this a couple of a week earlier on Twitter, where there's only so good. Your matchup against Delver can only be so good unless your deck is inherently horrible. Then your matchup can maybe be better. But Delver is just so optimized that if you struggle a little bit, even if you have uncounterable abrupt decays, there's certain games that are completely out of reach for you, and that's part of the appeal of Delver.
Yeah, totally. I mean, if you abrupt decay an Arcanist a turn late, it's still up one card and traded on mana. It's hard. It's tough. And tying into this, you need to understand what your deck is doing and how to build a sideboard off the back of that. It sounds pretty obvious, but if you're building a combo deck, you need to be ready for the hate that people are bringing for you. You need to be checking out all the top decks, what kind of sideboards they have. If you see loads of Mindbreak traps being played in the format because another deck like Tez, for example, is doing well, you need to be if you're another combo deck, you need to be trying to play under that, play discard, not Veil of Summer, for example. So you need to be aware of what hate people are going to be bringing against you. So that's mostly true for combo decks. So Elves does fall into that category a bit. But for Fair, this is where you get to have a bit more flexibility and a bit more spread. You don't need to hard target decks as much because you are the reactive deck and you need to be thinking, okay, well, I need to beat Delver. That's number one usually. I need to beat these combo decks, but you do have generic things like Counter Magic is usually good against combo decks. So you have a bit more flexibility there. That's where Snapcaster Mage comes in. The sideboard Snapcaster Mage. I just want to shout from the roof how good that card was, because it was your fifth Pyroblast. It was your third Surgical Extraction. It was your fourth Flusterstorm. It was everything. As long as you play enough of those cards in the first place. But yeah, I think it really is worth hammering home. Like you said, it's just do not try and beat these fringe decks unless you just play at a local game store level. Then by all means try and metagame against your friends. But in the grand scheme of things, you can't just play very narrow sideboard cards. It's a losing game.
Yeah, definitely. And something that we also touched on is always be mindful of how your opponent is actually going to adjust to your strategy, what you bring in. And that goes back to we have these historic examples because they are so well understood, especially involving top miracles. And that's when people were like, oh, you really gotta have choke or 7 library against top miracles, for example, out of elves. And the problem really, the thing that made 7 library work in the first place was that the effect was actually permanent. If you got to, it would usually just keep whatever cards I would see, just because I knew that very quickly I would eventually just lose the library. Whereas choke was something, Yeah. And while it looks good on paper, you know that your opponent is blind bringing in wear tear almost. And that, once again, put us into positions where we were like, okay, actually, we were not bringing in any kind of enchantments or artifacts, and they're going to have those 2 wear tears. Well, I guess it still work well with counterbalance, but you get the idea, right? So be aware of what they're doing and whether what you are doing is worth the potential extra risk that you're putting yourself under.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's our thoughts on sideboarding, I guess. You mentioned that it's important to have a sideboard map, which is really, at least it says so in the show notes. You actually didn't mention that.
Yes. I brushed over this. This is something you don't need to do straight away, but I think it's important to do it once you become very familiar with your deck. So it's not something you're going to do as soon as you build a list and start plotting things out. But a good exercise I like to do with this is once you're, as I said, familiar with everything, I like to just get the deck in front of me and lay it all out, and then go through MTG Goldfish, and then write down every single deck, the first 10 decks of the last month or whatever, putting up results. Whatever you deem to be the top 2 tiers of decks, basically. And then go through every single one and take out every single card in your main deck that you think you could see siding out, you definitely want out. So against Delver, you want to cut Force of Negation, maybe a Jace, maybe 1 or 2 Force of Wills, or something like that from the Shark control deck we were talking about earlier. So you get a rough idea of how many cards you want to cut from the main deck. So you think, okay, Delver, I want to cut 6 to 8 cards. Then next along, say there's Elves. You think, okay, I don't want this, I don't want that, I don't want these cards. And you think, okay, I want to cut 4 to 5 cards against Elves. And then so on until you have a list of roughly all the decks that you want to take out this number of cards. Then you can see where your holes are and see where your flexibility is. So this is where you can start to get some overlap in answers. So I can see okay, against like, so this is a very common thing for blue-white decks that have Source of Plowshares and Wrath of Gods and stuff. You see Ant and Sneak and Show. These are going to like stick out to you as you want 10 cards for them, for example. So you need to start thinking, okay, if I want 10 cards for these matchups, you need to overlap, like Vendilion Click is the classic card for blue decks to create this overlap and things. And then just go through every single one. And I feel like then being able to have this overview of every single matchup, how many cards you want to take out, gives you a much easier time of building a sideboard from the ground up. You think, okay, I want to have 5 cards for graveyard decks, for example, because you can start lumping them together as well. You can think, okay, this is combo where Source of Plowshares is bad. This is a control mirror where these cards are bad. And so every single little piece of information you get to yourself, you can write down notes at the same time. You're like, okay, I don't want these here or there. And it all starts to piece together in the end. For me anyway, this is how I do it. It all starts to make sense towards the end, and you build up this sideboard. And very often, this is going to give you flaws in your main deck. So the one Eternal Weekend that I top 8'd with you, I had 2 spare days before the weekend. So I spent hours and hours just going through everything. And I ended up changing 3 or 4 cards in the main deck, which I was positive the main deck was great before it. But then I ended up changing a bunch of cards because it just didn't work with the sideboard maps. And so in hindsight, I think that was pretty key. A lot of the cards came up and it worked out. So yeah, this is where you can really put the time in and go over things meticulously and work it out and think you make your sideboard maps perfect. And then new cards get released and break the format and everything goes to shit. But anyway, that's my process.
So I would say to sum it up, I think the relevant concept here is that of marginal value, which means like you compare how good is the card in the matchup that you're taking out to how good is the card that you're bringing in. And for the first couple of cards, you're going to have like a huge margin of power level. But as you bring in more cards, the cards you take out become better and better in the matchup until you get to a point where, yes, you're bringing in a card that is like a 10 in the matchup, or let's say a 7. But the card you're taking out is a 5. So even though the card you're bringing in is a 7 in the matchup, the marginal value really is only 2. And that's what basically happens when people have too many cards for a certain matchup and when they oversight for a certain matchup. And what that usually does is it leaves other matchups more exposed, where you're taking out like, I don't know, a 3 and you bring in a 4, which is like just this embarrassing thing that you bring in because you might cycle it at some point. And this is something that comes either with like you mentioned, drawing it all up, making a sideboard plan, or even just like playing. I notice, especially on Magic Online, when I'm in the sideboarding window, it often becomes very obvious because I would put all the cards I want to bring in like in one column, and then I move the cards that I want to take out right next to them. And sometimes I see there's like a discrepancy. I want to bring in more. Or sometimes it's actually not that uncommon that you want to take out more cards.
I do the same thing.
That's something you can also like just practice in Magic Online. If you like, even if you don't have all the cards, you can create a deck. If you set the quality, there's a thing, the quantity thing at the very top of the client to 0, then you can build any kind of deck, even if you don't have the cards. And once you did that, you can just move around the cards visually, which sometimes is easier than to just write it down, where you go like, okay, -5 this, +5 this, and stuff. Yeah. So that's something I would sometimes do with Fs.
Yeah, this also exposes like all the holes in it. Like, so we said in the main deck, you can think, okay, I need to make room so I can like sideboard out 10 cards against combo, and vice versa. You might think, oh shit, I have like too many cards to bring in against combo now. I need to like correct that in some way, because if you have too many cards to bring in certain matchups, you're spewing value by not using those slots to help another matchup as well. So this is balance of all 15 cards working out with the main deck. And this is what people talk about when they say building a 75, not 60 and 15. So it's a lot of work. It's meticulous sometimes, but it's really worth going through and checking everything in your head and knowing exactly why it's there in the beginning as well.
Since you mentioned the building the 75, are you familiar with the concept of elephanting?
I've heard this. Maybe even you told me the other day. But no,
yeah, so the general idea is that you build your entire 75 basically as a main deck almost. And you just put in all the cards that you might want for certain matchups and stuff. And then from that, you just put out 15 cards and put them into the sideboard. So you're not like, okay, this is my main deck. How do I fix the problems in my main deck? You basically, you create individual 60 card decks for the different matchups. and then you take all those 60 card decks that at maximum are using 75 different cards, and put them together in a single main deck, and then from there so you're not bringing in cards. You're actually, before you submit the deck, you side out 15 cards. So that's something I've never really done that, but I know that's.
But it sounds great.
I think Sam Black talked about it on their podcast a couple of years ago, and I've always thought about doing that in Legacy, because apparently that's something a lot of pros actually do, but they really construct their 75 by removing 15 cards from a giant main deck and having a deck like that. So it's not like I mentioned, it's not, okay, I'm going to fix a couple of holes. It's more like, I'm going to have the most efficient thing, and then I'm going to have some more other stuff in the sideboard. It's kind of interesting.
I'm going to give that a go, definitely.
Oh, awesome. What are you going to give a go later tonight? I think we've gone through pretty much anything here. I'm going to jump into Valorant, and then I'm actually going to be, we're going to record on Leaving a Legacy. They invited me.
Yeah, you're doing the double trouble. Bang,
double
bang.
trouble, yeah.
Yeah. For me, I mentioned that Shark Typhoon / lands kind of idea. I'm going to tinker around with that. Maybe I elephant it up. So I'm gonna work on that.
What's the most playable elephant in Legacy?
Rogue elephant.
Exactly, rogue elephant.
Yeah, there we go.
Awesome.
Easy, got it. Or Elephant Ambush gets the shout out for the coolest elephant card.
the flavor is just amazing, right?
Yeah, completely.
Ambushed by an elephant. Like when people have those ninjas that are secretly elephants, like somebody just... Anyway, we are getting too deep there. Where can people find you on social media?
Social media, I am on Whitefaces MTG at Twitter, so at Whitefaces MTG. Yeah, that's the best place to find me. I'm not super active on the other places. I haven't streamed for a little bit. I know I like to do it sometimes. It's been a little bit of a while, so maybe I should kick it up soon.
Awesome.
Yeah.
If you guys want to find me, I'm at itsjulian23 on Twitter and twitch.tv/itsjulian. You can also check out my website, itsjulian.com, where you might or might not have found this podcast. If you want to see the show notes, they're on there for sure. You can also follow our Everyday Eternal Twitter, which is at EternalMTG. So check that out. We've actually been growing a lot of followers over there. And that's just amazing to see that people actually are signing up to that, because that account is actually incredibly old. That account goes back to like 2013 when the podcast was first established. Wow. But we've got a decent number of followers by now, so... But nice. Better be careful. The more pictures of us with wine and beer we post, like this is actually like an alcohol podcast where they talk about magic as well.
Yes, well, I can talk about beers if you want to one time.
Oh, dude, I hate beer, but that's a different episode.
We'll fight about this sometime. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. If you want to support the podcast, there's a Patreon for us. Patreon.com/everydayeternal. Just like our new Patreon, actually, we have Chris Martin on our Thalia Guardian of Thraben tier. So, Chris, thank you so much for joining us, for supporting the running of the show. And, of course, we have our longtime supporters on the Eternal Witness tier, Matt Nams, Valerio, James Slack, and Victor Bernanst. And our top tier, Grizzlebrand tier, we have Baju Baj, Scott Monroe, Kulush Alistay, Jeremy Gates, and Dux on Twitch. So thank you so much for helping us run this. Like, this guys, you have no idea how much of a difference this makes. You can not only support us monetarily, it really helps out if you go to iTunes. That's the one I'm most concerned with. Like, I go to that every day now. There are other rating platforms as well, but iTunes is the biggest one, right? If people search for a podcast and you give us maybe a 5-star rating if you enjoy it quite a bit, then that's going to help us out a lot. That's going to help future people out a lot who are looking for legacy podcasts. So that's also something. And last but not least, really just like the bigger thing is spread the word. Let people know, hey, there's this cool legacy podcast. And then there's also Everyday Eternal. So maybe if you want to listen to another one.
Legacy podcast? That one. I thought we were a beer podcast.
Where we actually were supposed to be a vintage podcast at the very beginning, but that was 7 years ago. So now we're at Legacy. Like 7 years from now, we might talk about modern. Who knows?
Right. Cool.
So yeah, that's it for us tonight. Hope you liked the show. You can, if you join the Patreon on any kind of tier, you get access to our Everyday Eternal Discord, where you can meet awesome people and engage with everybody from the cast. And yeah, I think that with that, we're going to call it a day. See you again in August. God, like time is flying. Bye-bye. See you.
Goodbye, everyone. Take care.
Thank you so much.